Chain smoke your problems away. Smokepit Fairy Tales Part 4, Chapter 8, Life on Mars. Lova's Glaedwine finished reading her letter and laid it on her desk. The entire idea of paper mail seemed ridiculous to her. She realized the letter had been sent before a cell phone could be used from anywhere in the solar system, but she still enjoyed reading it. Thatch had sent it to her a couple of years prior while he was deployed. When the letter was written, his company had recently taken a Russian cruiser. Thatch and Glaedwine had actually talked about that encounter in person more recently than it was sent. The Christmas after that, he'd asked her if she'd ever received the letter. She looked again at the envelope. It was painted in redirection stamps. She flipped through the enclosed photos. Thatch and his friends were posed with Russian flags, weapons, and helmets. If she remembered right, Thatch still had one of the flags framed in his barracks room. She took a sip of her whiskey and looked at the close-up picture of Thatch. He looked exhausted but cheerful. He was about to light a cigarette and stared at the photographer like they were an old friend.
He looks just like his father.
Glaedwine leaned back in her chair and gazed at the stars shining over Annapolis. She could see Earth in the distance, not much more than another glowing dot in the sky anymore. She wondered whatever became of Hank. The last she heard of him, he was still fighting in St. Petersburg. No positive news of the war had come in the months before she left the Earth. She had known it wasn't going to end well. She thought humanity would have been destroyed. It was beyond her wildest dreams that the war would still be raging on almost 3 decades later. Then again, so was humanity's recovery in space and living on Mars. She had hoped that when Penelope gave her Thatch that it was only going to be temporary. She tried to get Penelope to come up with her, but she wouldn't. She said that she was going to wait for Hank. Glaedwine wondered if he'd ever made it home.
No. If the Russians didn't kill him, the radiation did. And if not that, then the cold and hunger. And how the hell could he even get all the way back to California from Russia all by himself?
She looked back at the photograph. Thatch was all she really had left. They weren't in space for a month before her husband, Jerry, was killed when the Russians destroyed the shuttle he was on. Raising Thatch alone while fighting the first space war with minuscule resources was a bitch, but she did it, and she was proud of herself for it.
Thatch grew up to be a good man. And if Hank and Penelope were around, they'd be proud of him too.
She took another sip of her whiskey and let her thoughts drift. She wondered what she'd be doing if they hadn't destroyed the Earth. She'd like to think that she'd be back in Texas, spending her days watching science fiction movies with Jerry. Hank and Penelope would visit during the summer, bringing Thatch with them. Thatch would be a completely different person, raised in San Diego, playing in the sun instead of spending his formative years in the dark, cold cities of the moon.
Fuck Vladimir Putin for starting this shit. How the fuck is that guy still alive?
Glaedwine sighed and sank deeper into her chair. She decided that if Thatch was raised by his biological parents, that he'd end up being just like Hank. He already reads the same books, plays the same songs on guitar, listens to the same music, and chases redheads around.
I didn't teach him any of that.
She ruffled her fingers through the mousy blonde hair she kept in a chin-length bob cut. It was still wavy, and if the day was humid enough, it might look like it was curled. She downed the rest of her drink and decided to take a nap. She took off her blouse and laid it over her chair. She didn't understand why the command wore space camouflage instead of Martian, but it didn't make a difference. The black and gray looked better anyway. The rusty red Martian camo didn't appeal to her. She laid down on the couch in her office and set an alarm on her watch to wake her up in a couple of hours for a meeting. Her eyes stung a bit when she lowered her lids. Glaedwine had thought about the last 30 years a little too hard. She didn't feel like crying that day, so she forced her eyes back open and stared into the blanket of stars over the city. She tried to get her mind off of the people she'd lost and thought back to when she was younger, on Earth, before the Resins came with their interstellar technology. She used to think that if humans ever made contact with extraterrestrial life, that the Earth would be better for it. Sure, utopia was unrealistic, but maybe disease could have been stopped. Possibly hunger and the threat of nuclear war.
Fucking people. We didn't even need supernatural technology to destroy ourselves. We did it with our own swords. At least Resins technologies helped the bulk of us get to safety in space.
The image of Jerry's shuttle exploding flashed in her mind's eye. She stood and watched from the hangar of the Enterprise, and that's all she could do. Watch and scream. She felt like someone had their fist clenched around her windpipe. The pain hadn't subsided, not an ounce. Tears began to push their way out of the corner of her eyes. The butterflies in her chest caught fire and burned their wings away as they clawed to get out. Glaedwine pushed her face into a pillow and washed the pain away. A knock on the door woke her up. She shot up off the couch, slightly confused about where she was. When it registered that she was in her office, she sighed, rubbed her face, and answered the door.
Yeah?
General Lucius Piroska, the Commandant of the Marine Corps. stood on the other side of the threshold.
Are you ready for the brief, Sergeant Major?
Yes, sir. Let me grab my blouse.
She put on the rest of her uniform and met General Piroska in the hall.
Have you heard anything about last night?
No. I spent the day talking to the NCOs and the 9th Marines at Camp Southern Cross. I only got back up here a few hours ago.
Well, there was an incident with an RAF Argent cruiser that destroyed a cargo ship captured by pirates.
Glaedwine wondered how that had anything to do with the Marines.
And?
The 11th MEU was in the vicinity and moving to board when the cargo ship was destroyed.
Glaedwine's eyes shot open with anxiety.
Don't worry, Sergeant Major. There weren't any American casualties.
Thank God.
A wave of relief hit Glaedwine like a breeze of cold air in a Texan August. She hated that Thatch was constantly in harm's way, but respected his decisions for going to combat. And she never once used her authority to keep him safe for her own benefit. To do so would be to undermine him.
I know your son's on the bottom, Richard, and I didn't want you to get worried about him.
I'm always worried about him, General.
The two of them continued down the hallway and stopped just short of the door to the conference room.
They should be home soon. Is he coming to see you on post-deployment leave?
I haven't talked to him, but he almost always does.
Piroska nodded his head and opened the door for Sergeant Major Glaedwine.
Attention, on deck.
Doing a little sound check. Doing that sound check. Checking that sound. Check it out.
Trip, just so you know, I can't pronounce peas. Penelope?
Check it. Choo! All right, we're doing the 8. We're doing the chapter 8. We're doing the recording now. All right.
I'm General Piroska. Chapter 8, Life on Mars. And that's not the voice I'm doing. Fooled you, bitch. He's going to sound like Richard Nixon. I don't know why I found that funny.
Are you ready for the brief, Sergeant Major?
Yes, sir. Let me grab my blouse.
Glaedwine. Just make sure you say it Glaedfine.
The 11th MEU was in the vicinity and moving to board when the cargo ship was destroyed.
Do that again. I didn't say 11th MEU right.
A wave of relief hit Glaedwine like a breeze of cool air in Texan August.
See, I wanted to go with Richard Nixon because I just understand the way that this character's going in the next book because he's a fucker.